Okay, good morning, boys and girls. Today we are going to start our next book, and what is the title?
Seas Behind Trees.
Yep, very good. And who is our author of this book?
Michael Dorris.
Good. All right, so our last book we got to read was a lot of fun, and it was a light book. We got to enjoy it because it was all about fantasy, right? It was not realistic at all. But this time our genre is
Historical fiction.
right. It's historical and it's realistic. This book is based on history and based on things that have happened and could happen, and based on things about our own country, and based on our curriculum for our 5th grade. So the story Seas Behind Trees, we are going to start here in our country, and in the United States, and with our tribe, the Iroquois. It's a tribe consisting of 6 nations, and they exist all along the northeast. The Iroquois tribe, they live, and they still do live. We still have some Iroquois Native Americans. They live all along the northeast up into the southern part of Canada. So yes, there are still Iroquois Indians today. And you will read a word that talks about moccasins. I think we've talked about them before in your book, Blood on the River. You've heard about moccasins, and that this is what moccasins look like. Of course, this is what they wear on their feet. This is a less authentic moccasin because it has a foot covering, but this is a more authentic moccasin that they have. It's just leather all around, except they wouldn't have a zipper on the back. So moccasins are what the Iroquois or any Native Americans would have on their feet, and we will come across that word in our first reading today. As we learn about our character, our main character, who speaks in first person, point of view is first person. Do you remember what first person point of view is? First person is when the story is told from his point of view. So you know it's first person when he's saying I and me. So he's saying it like everything is from his perspective. Okay, so he's telling you how he sees the story. Okay, so you're going to see more of that as we get into it. We'll talk more about that. Let me go ahead and get started. Turn please to page 1 in Seas Behind Trees. And always remember you're tracking with me as I read. We start right away in chapter 1 with dialogue. Dialogue. How do we know we have dialogue? What shows us that we have dialogue? Beautiful. We have quotation marks. Thank you, Cam. Okay. Try harder. Track it with your eye before you shoot. My mother's anxious voice snapped in my ear as loudly as a string of my bow. Track what? I asked for the 3rd time this morning. Before me, all I could see was the familiar blur of green and brown that meant I was outside of the forest on a sunny day. And then, by squinting, I could sense something coming toward me, smell the familiar pemmican scent of berries mixed with dried meat, recognize the tread of moccasins I had heard 1,000 times before. Gradually, one blurry image began to stand out from all others, and an instant later, it turned into my approaching mother. When she was close enough for me to touch, I could tell from her face and from the tenseness of her body that she was worried. This, she said, shaking the clump of moss that she held in one hand, and in the other were 4 arrows I had already shot, which she dropped at my feet. When I throw the moss in the air, imagine its flight, and then aim where you think it will be. By the time your arrow meets it, it's not so hard, and every boy must learn how to do it before he becomes a man. A rumbling noise came from my stomach, and my mother smiled her I've got an idea smile. Think of the moss as your breakfast, she suggested. Imagine it is a corn cake, hot from the ashes, so delicious. I could almost taste it on my tongue. Feel its crunch as I bit down. Smell the sweet fullness it would bring. Couldn't I just eat first, just this once? I pleaded. I'm sure I could find the moss in the sky if I weren't so hungry. For a moment I thought my mother would give in, and I leaned toward her, blinking as though a steaming golden cake would appear in her hand to replace the straggly plant. But all that changed was my mother's expression. Walnut, follow along please, middle of page 2. My name in her mouth was tired, pounded into flour. You know the rule. You must find the target before breakfast can find you. So boys and girls, this is part of the Iroquois training process. Every morning, if you remember in Blood in the River, every morning before the boys can eat breakfast, what must they do? Shoot their target, right? So this is what the mother's helping him train to do. But you can find in her tone that she's frustrated. Is he having much luck?
No.
No, and we're starting to get a hint that there's a problem here. She brings back 4 arrows that missed their mark. So there's a problem with this boy. Do we know the problem yet? Are we getting a sense, though, that there's something going on? There's some kind of problem with him, right? We're getting a sense that there's some issue. We just don't, we don't quite know what it is, but the author is leading us to this problem. We just don't know quite what it is yet. I nodded. If that was a rule, I wouldn't eat for a long time. We had faced this matter of what I couldn't see. Ooh, there's a little bit of leading to the problem. Many times before, when my mother would point to something I couldn't locate or throw a ball I couldn't catch, but it had never before been such a serious business. I'm at the top of page 3. Now we couldn't just act as though nothing was wrong. Now we had to solve the problem. We had struggled with it every morning since 3 days ago. My mother had decided it was time to teach me, her oldest child, how to use a bow and arrow. I had never once succeeded, and I knew that sooner or later she would give up, make some excuse, and feed me. But it would not be soon. Maybe if you made your eyes smaller? My mother encouraged me by bringing her cheek so close to my forehead that she looked like a dried onion, and I made the mistake of laughing. Today, my mother said in the same voice she had used when I was younger, and she told me not to play with sharp knives. She picked up an arrow from the ground and sternly held it out for me to take. She walked back to the place where she threw the moss into the air. Today, we will not surrender. And before I could object, she had disappeared again into that mist of color and noise that surrounded me, like the roof and the walls of a very small house. Now! I quickly pointed my arrow high above the place where her voice came from and released it. Better, she called. The sunlight must have confused you. Try again. There were many other things I could do, I told myself when finally, not with a single victory, we came home. I could make a whistle from a stiff reed using only the sharp edge of a clamshell. I could sing a song after hearing it just one time. I could find wild strawberries, even clusters of violets, by closing my eyes and following the directions of my nose. I could hear my father's footsteps before anyone else. He's back, I would inform my brothers and sisters, giving them a little longer to stop playing and compose themselves. So why couldn't I shoot? Is there some trick to it? I asked my mother's brother brings the deer one evening as we were sitting in front of our house, watching fireflies as they flickered before our faces. He was the best archer in our whole family, so he should know. Practice is the only trick, my uncle said, sounding more like my father than himself. Usually, since he was younger than my mother and he didn't yet have any children of his own, he was less serious. It's been days and days and I'm no better. Maybe, Brings the deer tone was gentler and more understanding. Maybe your bowstring is not tight enough. He reached over to where it rested by my leg and tested it. No, it seems all right. Maybe you're closing your eyes at the last moment before you shoot. I did that myself when I first started. I shook my head. Or maybe, well, how many fingers am I holding up? I tipped my head. The dusky light was dim, but I could still see my own hands balled into fists. Fingers? How many? I couldn't tell how many arms he was holding up, much less how many fingers. 3? I guessed. How many now? 2? Now? 5? There was silence. Walnut. I was holding up no fingers at all. I knew that. Though it wasn't true. I was just making a joke. But Brings the deer didn't laugh. What do you guys think about the tone right now?
He knows something about himself.
Do you think the impairment is coming out?
Yeah.
What kind of impairment is that the boy has? He has a visual impairment, maybe more than color blindness. He has a pretty strong visual impairment. Now, is he completely blind? No, because he can see his own hands when they're close up. But can he see anything far off? No, he can't see far off. So is he ever going to be able to hit his target? No, but he can smell really well, right? And he can hear really well. Because when one of our senses is lost, our other senses strengthen, right? Okay. The next morning when my mother woke me for shooting practice, we went to a new part of the forest. And that was only the first odd thing. Put down your bow and sit on this rock, my mother said, patting a large flat stone at the base of a pine tree. Then from her sack, she brought out a tightly woven sash and placed it over my eyes and tied it with a length of grapevine. So what is she doing?
Like blindfolding him.
Beautiful. She's blindfolding him. So now she's completely taking away his sight, right? Isn't that odd? She's making it even harder for him. So it sounds like she has an idea.
I think she's going to make him rely on his
other senses. Beautiful inference, Cam, and prediction. What are you doing? I wanted to know. Shh. Describe this place to me. But I've never been here before, and I can't see. Shh. Look with your ears. At first, there was nothing to hear, just the forest. But the longer we didn't talk, the more separate parts announced themselves. The hush of a brook just behind me. And farther beyond that, the rush of a river, the buzz of a beehive on a tree, not far over to my right, the beat of a hummingbird's wings as it dove in and out of the cluster of, what was that smell? Roses near where my mother, who, I could tell, had just oiled her hair this morning, sat. Don't move, I said as I heard her prepare to shift her weight. It's only a hummingbird. What's only a? Oh, she whispered, how beautiful. What else do you see, Walnut? So I told her. There are so many things that it took the whole morning to list them all. And the amazing fact was, I completely forgot to be hungry for breakfast. And from that day on, instead of shooting arrows, we went each dawn to a new spot and stayed until I had surprised my mother at least 4 times by what I could see, but she could not.